Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. We're continuing our Big 12 football predictions today with our next team, Iowa State Cyclones. So Matt Campbell is going into his second year at Iowa State after leaving the Toledo job. Last year he went 3-9, had 2 Big 12 conference wins, so it was a pretty decent first year for him. I know it's not the season Iowa State fans are hoping for since they haven't been to a bowl game since 2012, but I think Matt Campbell is definitely building something that's coming up in the next few years. He has 11 starters back this year, including Alan Lazard at wide receiver, who's only 678 yards from being the all-time leading receiver at Iowa State. So he has a chance to break that this season. Iowa State, though, has perennially, for the past couple of years, been towards the bottom of the Big 12. So let's see if they can find their way out of the cellar this year. I think it's going to be a tie or a close tie between them and Kansas to see who finishes last. So that game on October 14th could determine who finishes last in the Big 12. So let's get started here. They start off with Northern Iowa, a team they started off the season against last year and lost. At home, they lost to Northern Iowa 25-20 in Campbell's debut. Not the way they wanted to start it, but this season I think they're going to make sure they start off on a better note, get a little revenge on Northern Iowa, start off with a win there. And then they get Iowa in state rivalry. As I've said before, I know last year kind of disproved my theory, but Iowa State is a very tough place to play at home, or when they're at home. So they could give the Hawkeyes a test, especially since the Hawkeyes are not as experienced this year as they were a couple years ago when they went undefeated in the regular season. But I think Iowa, in the end, is going to be the better team, and I think Iowa State's going to end up losing this game. Jacob Park is also coming in at quarterback. He did play a little bit last season. I think he's going to have a pretty good year statistically this season, but will it be enough with only 5 returning stars on offense to get the Cyclones back to a bowl game or pull off just another major upset like they did back in 2011 over Oklahoma State? We'll have to see. This is a game I'm going to get a lot of hate for. I'm predicting a loss at Akron, and here's why. Akron has one of the best quarterbacks in the MAC right now with Thomas Woodson. He put a great season statistically last year. He's only going to get better this season, assuming he can stay healthy. Now, Matt Campbell does have some experience against Akron because he coached at Toledo for a few years. They were in the same conference. With it being on the road and Akron being a very experienced team with 15 returning starters, I think Iowa State has a lot of unknowns right now. And I don't like that it's on the road. And I really do love Akron's offense, so this game could come down to Iowa State's defense. It's going to be a lot closer than people expect. Right now, I'm going to give Iowa State the loss. Could see it being a win. I would not be shocked if this game was a win. But for right now, I'm going to project this game as a loss. And that's mostly because I really do have faith in Akron's offense this season. I think they're really going to improve. They almost made a bowl game last year. Just fell short at 5-7. I think they might be able to make another one this year. And I'm going to give them the loss on the road. Bye week, playing Texas right after that, coming off a short bye week, only 5 days after that. If you remember 2 years ago when Texas came to Iowa State, they shut them out 24-0. Iowa State shut Texas out 24-0. That was in the Charlie Strong era, though. Not some of Texas' greatest years. This year they're led by Tom Herman and a much better team overall, especially defensively with 10 returning starters. I think Texas is going to be too much for Iowa State to handle. This game could be close because Iowa State last year was a lot better than their 3-9 record showed. They had very close losses to Baylor and Oklahoma State. Had they won those, they would have had 5 wins. I think they also had a very close loss to Kansas State. I think that game was 31-26. Had they been able to pull out all of those, they would have been 6-6 and made a bowl game. So they did have gave some teams some scare, especially at home. Could give Texas a scare here, but I don't think they're going to have enough to defeat the Longhorns. And then at Oklahoma, last year they only lost to Oklahoma at home by 10 points, so that's actually fairly respectable. This year they have to travel to the Sooners, led by Baker Mayfield. I know they have a new coach in Lincoln Riley, but he was promoted from within. I have a lot of faith in them. I think they're still the top dogs in the Big 12, and I think they're going to lose on the road to Oklahoma. And I think that should be pretty expected. I don't think that's a shocker to anybody. Now, they're coming off a 4-game losing streak, 1-4. Not the kind of start Matt Campbell was hoping for. They need to stop the bleeding. I think they're going to get against Kansas, a team that's also struggled recently under David Beatty, who's going into his 3rd year at Kansas. Fairly new head coach is squaring off. I'm going to give them the win over the Jayhawks here. And like I said, this game could really determine who finishes last in the Big 12. No one wants to finish in the cellar. And with that win over Kansas, that gives Iowa State the edge for now. And then they play Texas Tech on the road, who has a very explosive offense led by Nick Shimonek. I know Cliff Kingsbury is going to be really wanting to get this team back to a bowl game, and that his job could be riding on whether or not he gets them to a bowl game or not. But right now, with being on the road, with it being a tough offense, And Iowa State having a little bit of unknown on defense. They played pretty well on defense last year. I have a little more faith in their offense this season, though. But I'm going to give them the loss to Texas Tech. And this second half of the schedule is pretty brutal, though. Texas Tech's a tough offense. TCU's a very difficult offense with 10 starters back. Oklahoma State and Kansas State. That's just a brutal schedule there at the end. I would not be surprised if, when you look at the spreads, Iowa State is an underdog in 9 to 10 games this season. It would not be a shocker. TCU at home, as I just said, 10 starters back on offense. Gary Patterson is going to make sure this team has the right mindset. I think even though it's at home, they could give TCU a scare. If they're going to upset anybody at home, I think it's going to be Texas or TCU. But right now, unfortunately for the Cyclones, I'm going to give them another loss. But like I said, if they're going to pull off another major upset, kind of shock some people like Kansas did to Texas last year or something like that, it would come to Texas or TCU in my opinion. And then West Virginia, where they're going to have to travel there. Will Greer taking over at quarterback. Dana Holgorsen relying on a bunch of junior college players to fill the holes with only 8 starters back total. At West Virginia, though, I really don't see Iowa State winning this, not just because it's on the road, but I have a lot more faith in Dana Holgorsen. His team has been there longer, more experienced head coach, knows what he's doing. Not to say that Matt Campbell does not, but I do have a lot more faith in this Mountaineer team. Could fly under the radar. Oklahoma State, another difficult team to face. Mason Rudolph throwing to his favorite receiver, James Washington. Rudolph is a potential Heisman Trophy candidate. They're a potential playoff dark horse. It would be crazy if Oklahoma State was doing well like they were in 2011 and Iowa State upset them again. We all remember that game back in 2011. Oklahoma State was 1 win away from more than likely playing for the national championship, where they would have probably faced LSU. But if Iowa State is to upset Oklahoma State again, it would be amazing. It would take a heck of a defensive effort to slow down that dynamic offense of the Cowboys. Don't see it happening this year, but boy, wouldn't that be a story if they could, especially if Oklahoma State was still in position to make the college football playoff. And then, unfortunately, they closed out against 2 fairly decent teams on the road. That's a shame for them. On the road, Baylor, now led by Matt Rule from Temple. He's trying to transform the Bears into a pro-style offense instead of more of the air raid. And that could hurt Baylor a little bit. Iowa State almost beat Baylor last year. I think the final score was 45-42. Baylor kicked a game-winning field goal there at the end. With it being on the road and with Matt Rule, I think getting this Baylor team into shape towards the end of the season, they're going to be fighting for a bowl berth. Obviously, Iowa State will not. Another loss to Baylor. And then at Kansas State, led by Jesse Ertz and Bill Snyder, another very difficult quarterback to defend. I'm going to give, unfortunately, Iowa State another loss to Kansas State. A lot of the factors are pointing down, and I don't know how into the season they're going to be at this point. They're really just playing for pride right now with only 2 wins on the season. And I don't think they're going to be able to upset the Wildcats on the road, and that's going to be a loss. So, unfortunately for Iowa State, they are going to take, in my opinion, take a little bit of a step down from that 3-9 season they had last year, go 2-10. They do get a conference win over Kansas. I would not be surprised if they get the win over Akron. I know I might get some hate for that. So I could see them reaching the 3-9 mark again for the 2nd straight year. If they want to get that 4th win, it's going to have to come over Texas or TCU. I don't see it coming against anybody else. They could maybe upset Baylor or West Virginia on the road, but I don't like their chances on either of those. So I think 2-10 or 3-9 is very reasonable for the Cyclones this season. So we'll just have to wait and see. I hope they keep Matt Campbell around, because I know he's a very capable head coach, and he's going to end up building something at Iowa State and getting them back to a bowl game for the first time since 2012. I'm just not calling for it this season. So please continue to like, comment, subscribe, and please continue to share our videos, and we'll see you next time on The Gridiron Expert.